Ready to dive into a case about small-town celebrations gone wrong.
Interesting.
This isn't your typical accounting story, though. We're talking festivals, procurement laws,
Right.
and a Supreme Court decision that has implications for all of us.
I'm intrigued. Let's hear it.
It all centers on GR No 254337 from the Supreme Court of the Philippines.
Okay.
So have you ever come across a case like this before?
You know, what's really fascinating about this case is how it highlights the importance of procedure.
Right.
We often think of rules as being inconvenient, but in this instance, they serve a critical purpose.
Exactly. So let's set the scene.
Okay.
Imagine a vibrant municipality in the Philippines.
Okay.
Dr. Jose P. Rizal in Palawan, gearing up for their annual festivities.
I can picture it.
They've got the Biri-Barian program, Women's Day celebrations, their founding anniversary, and the Grand Baragatan Festival.
Lots to plan for.
Big celebration.
Yeah.
All events that require resources, food, decorations, entertainment, you name it.
For sure. And here's where things get interesting, I bet.
And here's where things get interesting.
Okay.
To procure these goods and services, the municipality, specifically their Bids and Awards Committee, BAC, opted for a method called Small Value Procurement.
Interesting.
Now, for those of us who aren't procurement experts, what exactly does that mean?
Sure.
Is it like a bulk discount at the party's supply store?
Not quite. It's a specific procurement method outlined in Philippine law, Republic Act number 9184,
Okay.
designed for smaller purchases under a certain threshold, in this case, PHP 100,000. The idea is to simplify the process for smaller transactions.
Okay, so you can imagine with all these celebrations, the municipality figured, hey, let's streamline things and use this small value procurement method. Seems logical, right?
On the surface, perhaps.
Yeah.
However, this is where the Commission on Audit, or COA, steps in. Think of them as the guardians of public funds, making sure everything is above board.
And they weren't too happy with how the municipality handled things, were they?
Not exactly.
Okay.
The COA, seeing a pattern in the municipality's actions, issued 8 notices of disallowance.
8.
These notices essentially serve as red flags, indicating potential violations of procurement laws and
I
regulations.
saw notices.
That sounds serious. What exactly had the municipality done wrong? Were they just a little over budget on the party streamers?
It's a bit more involved than that.
Okay.
The COA pointed to several issues. First, there was the matter of missing documentation.
Okay.
Proper procurement processes require meticulous record keeping, and that seemed to be lacking.
So it's like trying to claim those business expenses without any receipts.
HQ.
That's not going to fly with the tax man, or in this case, the COA.
Then there were concerns about the BAC resolutions themselves. These resolutions, meant to authorize the procurement process, were deemed too broad and lacking in specificity.
Well, instead of outlining the specific goods or services needed for, say, Women's Day, a resolution might simply recommend using small value procurement for goods and services in general.
So no detailed list of what was being bought, from whom, or for how much. That does sound a bit vague.
Precisely. This lack of detail raised alarm bells for the COA, as it made it incredibly difficult to track spending and ensure competitiveness and transparency.
So it's starting to feel less like an honest oversight and more like they were trying to skirt around the rules.
The COA also found instances where the municipality appeared to split larger purchases into smaller ones, presumably to stay below that PHP 100,000 threshold for small value procurement.
The old divide and conquer approach to procurement. I wonder if they used that strategy for the Baragatan Festival, too.
We might never know the specifics of the festival's finances, but the COA definitely saw a pattern of potential contract splitting, which again raises concerns about transparency and whether they were truly getting the best value for public funds.
Okay, so we have questionable record keeping, vague resolutions, potential contract splitting, all raising red flags for the COA.
Yeah.
What was the municipality's response to these accusations?
Sure.
Surely they didn't just plead guilty.
Not at all. They came prepared with their own set of arguments.
Okay.
For instance, they argued that the actual expenditures were less than what the COA had calculated.
A classic defense. Essentially, they were saying, look, we may have cut a few corners, but it didn't cost that much in the grand scheme of things.
That was their argument. They also claimed that the very nature of these events, time-sensitive celebrations,
Right.
made it impossible to always follow the standard, more lengthy procurement processes.
Okay.
They even cited poor internet connectivity as a reason for not being able to properly utilize the Field GPS website.
Field GPS website? What is it? Some kind of online marketplace for government purchases?
Exactly. It's the Philippine Government Electronic Procurement System,
Oh, wow.
a platform designed to increase transparency and competition in government procurement. But the municipality claimed that their unreliable internet access hindered their ability to fully utilize the platform, further justifying their actions.
So they're pleading a case of too busy celebrating to follow all the rules and blaming it on shoddy internet service.
Yeah,
I can't imagine the COA was too sympathetic to those arguments.
you're right. The COA wasn't convinced.
Okay.
They countered by emphasizing that regardless of the circumstances, established procurement procedures exist for a reason,
Right.
and even time constraints for annual events don't justify bypassing them.
And what about their claim that they actually spent less than the COA calculated?
The COA highlighted that the lack of specificity in the BAC resolutions made it incredibly difficult to accurately track expenditures in the first place.
Okay, so things are getting heated. We have the municipality claiming they're innocent, the COA standing firm on their findings. It sounds like this is headed for a showdown.
And a showdown it was.
Okay.
The municipality appealed the COA's decision, first to the COA regional office, then to the COA commission proper. Wow.
Both times, their arguments were rejected.
Oh, wow.
Determined, they decided to take their case to the highest court in the land, the Supreme Court of the Philippines.
Wow, they really weren't backing down. Talk about taking a stand for your right to party. So what happened next? Did the Supreme Court buy their arguments? Or did they side with the COA?
Well, the Supreme Court, in its decision on GR No. 254337, provided a nuanced perspective, I guess you could say.
Okay.
They dove into the heart of the issue,
Right.
examining not just the letter of the law,
Right.
but also its spirit.
Okay, so no sweeping judgments. They really scrutinize the details.
Precisely.
Okay.
And this is where their reasoning gets really interesting.
Okay.
They began by highlighting the 4 pillars of Republic Act No. 900A184.
Okay.
The law governing government procurement in the Philippines, transparency, competitiveness, streamlining, and accountability.
Those sound like pretty fundamental principles for good governance in general.
Absolutely.
Yeah. The court emphasized that these principles are vital for ensuring that public funds are used in a manner that serves the best interests of both the government and, most importantly, the people.
Which makes perfect sense. We all want to know that our tax money is being used responsibly and effectively.
Exactly. And that can only happen when there's a system in place that guarantees fairness and prevents abuse.
Right.
The court drove this point home by highlighting the crucial role of the Bids and Awards Committee, or BAC.
So they're not just a rubber stamping body, they have real responsibilities.
Absolutely.
Okay.
The court emphasized that the BAC's role goes beyond mere ceremonial procedures.
Right.
They have a mandate to safeguard the integrity of the procurement process, ensuring it aligns with those key principles we discussed: transparency, competitiveness, and accountability.
Which in this case, the COA argued they didn't do.
Yes, and the Supreme Court ultimately agreed,
Okay.
at least in part.
Yeah.
They found that the municipality had indeed engaged in splitting contracts and misusing the small value procurement method.
So game over for the municipality.
Not so fast.
Okay.
The court's decision wasn't a simple guilty or not guilty verdict.
Okay.
They delved into the specifics of the case,
Right.
dissecting the arguments presented by both sides.
Okay, so let's unpack those arguments one by one.
Okay.
First, the municipality claimed that they actually spent less than the COA calculated.
Right.
What did the court say about that?
The court acknowledged their claim,
Okay.
but ultimately didn't consider it a valid justification for their actions. They emphasized that even if the final spending was below the threshold,
Right.
the act of splitting contracts to circumvent competitive bidding still constituted a violation of procurement laws.
So even if they saved a few pesos here and there, it doesn't excuse them from following the rules.
Precisely. The court then addressed the municipality's claims about time constraints and poor internet connectivity.
Those were their arguments about not having enough time for regular procurement because of the festivals,
Right.
and not being able to properly use the Phil GPS website due to bad internet.
Yes, those ones.
Yeah.
While the court acknowledged the realities of limited resources and logistical challenges,
Okay.
they ultimately ruled that these factors don't supersede the need to adhere to established procurement procedures.
So no get-out-of-jail-free card for claiming a tight festival deadline.
Not in this case.
Yeah.
The court emphasized that these were annual events
Right.
that the municipality had ample time to plan for.
And what about their internet woes?
Yeah.
Did the court buy that excuse?
They didn't.
Okay.
The court noted that the municipality had been citing poor internet connectivity as a reason for not fully utilizing the PhilGPS website for years,
Oh, really?
suggesting a lack of effort to find solutions.
Okay, so the Supreme Court carefully considered each of the municipalities' defenses, but didn't find them convincing enough to excuse their disregard for proper procurement procedures.
Right.
What about the liability of those involved? Were they all held equally responsible?
That's where the nuance of the court's decision becomes even more apparent.
Okay.
They differentiated between the roles and responsibilities of the BAC members
Okay.
and the BAC Secretariat, Mr. Avancina.
Okay, remind me again, what's the difference between the BAC members and the Secretariat?
The BAC, or Bids and Awards Committee,
Right.
is the group responsible for recommending and approving procurement methods,
Mhm.
while the BAC Secretariat provides administrative support.
Okay.
Think of it as the Secretariat managing the paperwork and logistics,
Okay.
while the BAC members make the actual decisions about how to go about procuring goods and services.
So how did the court differentiate their liability in this case?
They ultimately found that the 5 BAC members, Palarca, Tolentino, de Guzman, Colomba, and Lobaton, were solidarily liable for the disallowed amounts.
Solidarily liable.
Yeah.
What does that mean in plain English?
It means each member is individually responsible for the full amount. The COA could choose to recover the entire sum from any one of them.
Wow.
However, the court took a different stance when it came to the BAC Secretariat, Mr. Avancina.
So different rules for the person managing the paperwork. What did they decide about him?
They completely absolved him,
Wow.
stating his role was purely administrative and didn't involve decision-making in the procurement process.
Well, wow.
They reasoned that based on Republic Act number 9184,
Hmm.
the Secretariat's responsibilities primarily revolve around providing support, not recommending or approving methods.
So he was essentially off the hook because he was just following orders. That's a pretty significant distinction.
Exactly. And it underscores a crucial point when it comes to accountability, determining who had the authority to make decisions and who is merely carrying them out.
It's like the difference between the person who plans the bank heist
Yeah.
and the getaway driver. Both are involved, but their levels of responsibility are different.
Sure.
So the BAC members were found liable. But what about the municipality itself? They still had to pay for the goods and services, right?
That's where things get even more interesting.
Okay.
While the Supreme Court upheld the disallowances issued by the COA, they also introduced a fascinating legal principle called quantum meruit.
Quantum meruit. Now, there's a phrase you don't hear every day. What does that even mean? Sounds like something out of a Harry Potter spellbook.
It's not magic, though it can seem that way in legal contexts.
Right.
Quantum meruit essentially means as much as he deserves.
Okay.
It's a principle that allows a party to recover the reasonable value of services rendered, even in the absence of a formal contract.
Okay, so in this case, even though the municipality messed up the procurement process, they still received goods and services for their celebrations. They can't just get those for free, even if they forgot the paperwork.
Precisely. The court recognized this.
Right.
And instead of simply demanding a full reimbursement, they instructed the COA to recalculate the amounts owed by the BAC members, this time considering the principle of quantum meruit.
So it's like Thorpe was saying, yes, rules were broken, but let's be reasonable and figure out a fair price for what was actually provided. It's a refreshing dose of common sense in the often complicated world of legal proceedings.
Exactly. The case was remanded back to the COA
Okay.
to determine what a fair price would have been for those goods and services if proper procurement procedures had been followed.
Which makes this decision particularly relevant for anyone involved in public spending. It emphasizes the importance of striking a balance, upholding accountability,
Right.
while also ensuring that public funds are used effectively.
It's not just about punishing mistakes,
Yeah.
but about finding solutions that are both just and practical.
Right.
This case is a fantastic example of the court going beyond simply enforcing the letter of the law,
Right.
and instead taking into account the real-world implications of their decisions.
It's a good reminder. that legal matters aren't just about abstract principles. They involve real people, real communities, and real money.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This entire case, from the local festivities to the Supreme Court ruling,
Right.
underscores a point that we've been circling around this whole time.
Mm-hmm.
Procurement procedures aren't arbitrary bureaucratic hurdles. They serve a critical purpose.
They exist to protect everyone involved.
Precisely.
Right.
They ensure transparency, accountability, and fairness in the use of public funds.
Look.
It's about making sure that every peso is spent responsibly
Right.
and delivers the intended benefits to the community.
So next time you see those festival decorations going up in your town square,
Yeah.
or hear about a new local development project, remember the lessons of GR No 254337.
It's a good reminder.
Don't just enjoy the festivities or appreciate the end result. Take a moment to consider the processes behind them.
Yeah, think about how they got there.
Because ensuring responsible spending, whether it's for a community celebration or a major infrastructure project, is everyone's responsibility. It starts with awareness, understanding, and a willingness to ask questions. And who knows, you might just uncover a fascinating legal case in your own backyard.